Hi, everyone. Welcome back to a new episode of The New Unfiltered. I'm really excited about this episode because most of you know that I recently moved to the UK. I'm in London now to build out the UK branch of AC Consulting, which I launched in the US last year. So I've got that going on here and I'm loving it so far. I was at an event a week ago now with a dear friend of mine, Tiffany Dark, who was speaking, who I actually met years ago in New York that she invited me to. And I just connected with so many remarkable people at this event, Susie being one of them. But before I get into this episode, reminder to subscribe to Stay Fearless or Jai Trying. There is a new launch with premium webinars. So if you upgrade to the premium membership, which is $17 a month, you get access to a really incredible webinar with one of my friends who's probably some form of a CEO or executive, as well as tons of personal branding tips and access to this awesome community that I've been building since I was 12, with so many people just doing incredible things in their career and personal life. So head to the show notes to find out more about that or get a media kit or list of entertainment contacts. But at this event, I sat next to Susie Rodgers. She is a retired professional Paralympic swimmer for Great Britain. She competed in 2 Paralympic Games in London 2012, where she won 3 bronze medals in freestyle events, and Rio 2016, where she won gold in the 50-meter butterfly and 2 bronze. In total, she won 30 international medals during her career, 17 of them gold. She's passionate about ocean conservation as an ocean ambassador for the UK's Marine Conservation Society. She's also a public speaker and advises on inclusion in her professional roles. Susie, I am so excited to have you on the show. And I want to kick it off because I was just watching an interview with you, and somebody said or asked you a question about how you knew you wanted to be an athlete. And there's so much to go into, but I would love to start off with that.
Well, thanks for having me on the podcast. And it was serendipity that we sat next to each other last week. So there you go. And we've quickly turned that around to get me on. So it's a really good question. How did I get into it? Because actually, I'm quite unusual in that I got into sport a bit later in my life. The traditional route for athletes is, you start off super young when you're a child, and then that progresses into like an elite career. And with me, it was a bit different. I didn't train as much as a kid. I loved swimming as a hobby and a sport and a passion, but I didn't see it as like a viable career option. I was like, yeah, that's not going to work for me. So I went the academic route, got a job, and then I kind of found my way back to the sport. So it's a sort of a roundabout journey. But I think the one thing that was always there was I was very passionate for swimming, and I just loved it. And I think it then something I loved became my job.
You were born also with a disability, which is remarkable. I mean, what you've done is I'm speechless. It's insane, for anyone who's listening and is like, I can't do this or I can't do this. I'm talking to a literal gold medalist who was born with a disability. So talk to me about that. When you were growing up, I think embracing knowing you were different is something that so many people, myself included, not even having a disability, just feeling like I was always different growing up, struggle with.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I'm kind of 40 to give away my age, but when I was born and when I was growing up, I would say I'm almost jealous of people today because I feel like there's more awareness now than there was when I was a kid growing up and during my teenage years, which were, they're tough for anybody, but like super tough for me. I mean, I would say that I was lucky. I had parents that were very practical and had like a can-do attitude. So when I was born, it wasn't like, I was different. It was more like Susie is Susie and she's going to, integrate into society. She's going to live her life independently, and that's that. And I think that kind of instilled in me that mentality. Though I would say as I've kind of grown and kind of looked more at my identity as someone with a disability, I feel more like I don't have to go so hard on myself to fit in, because actually society just isn't inclusive of people with disabilities in the most part. So I feel like it shouldn't be on me to have to adapt. It should be that other people are thinking about that too. So, yeah.
So adapting to, I guess, what you would probably consider to be a bit of a growth mindset.
Mm.
Was there a moment along the way where you were like, I can't do this. I feel too different, especially growing up?
Not really. I mean, I suppose in my teenage years, I guess I was super aware of my looks, and how I looked in clothing. And yeah, just for the viewers or listeners benefit, I have a prosthetic arm and leg, so that is my disability. So I used to be always aware of like wearing t-shirts that would show my arm, and I'd be like, oh, I have to hide it. Whereas I'd say now there's almost more of a kind of movement of people with disabilities kind of embracing their differences and being like, okay, I can wear what I want and be who I am and not have to hide that. And I suppose I missed that when I was younger.
And your family, like growing up, you said that they were supportive of you, but were they also athletes?
Uh, no, I mean, we are quite a sporty family. So my dad and my mum are very like, they're the type of people that just don't sit down. Like they don't know what rest and relaxation is. At times I'm like, sit down. But yeah, they're just really kind of get up and go people. We're very outdoorsy. So I think there was always, I always enjoyed doing sport. I always enjoyed being outdoors. So that's what we did as a family. So yeah, none of them are elite athletes, but they're all kind of active.
Got it. Okay, super interesting. And so just for everyone listening who doesn't know, so you were born without an arm and a leg, correct?
Yeah, so like birth complications, yeah.
And when you decided to pursue sports, was there a moment where you were like, I love this? Like, what? I don't know. I mean, throughout my career, I've had moments where I'm like, okay, this is it. Like, this is how I know what I love to do. You just almost feel so free. I'm also convinced that athletes are very similarly built to entrepreneurs. When I was sitting next to you, you mentioned, or I think Tiffany or Diana asked you something, and you just said, your fearlessness and like your concentration, it almost becomes an obsession with like success and wanting to win, which I think is truly entrepreneurship. So have you had that moment along the way where you just knew this is what I want to do for a while?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I ever really in the journey and the day to day would reflect on, oh, I'm doing the right thing here. I don't think I would really think about that. I think it was more the processes to get me to the goals that I had in my mind of like, I want to do this in swimming, I want to achieve that. So it was more like steps to get me there. I think if you project to the end, that can be really nerve-wracking, and it can add to your stress. So I tried not to think about the outcome as much as the process of getting there. And the amount that I learned was more through the journey than it was through the winning, which obviously is incredible, but there's no guarantee, right? At the end of it, you're all equal, you're all racing equally, you've all done the preparation. So it's really just what happens on the day. And it's sort of being comfortable with that kind of scale of risk of like, training for 4 years for a race that's like under a minute long. It really is over very quickly, but you have to be comfortable with all of the outcomes that could come from that, including losing, which is or not winning, or getting a lower position than you wanted.
I wrote down something the other day that said, if you really believe in your idea, you're not taking as much of a risk. But you're totally right. Most people struggle with believing fully that they can do something or like reaching their fullest capability. And
Mm.
it seems like you as a kid were just born like this. Would you suggest that?
I think I was born with an element of like determination and quite stubborn, I would say. I don't know if that's like stubborn is like, I suppose it's viewed as a bad thing in a character, but actually I think sometimes it can be a good thing, because stubbornness means that you just like, no, I'm going to do this and I'm going to prove it, not to anybody, but just to yourself, right? And I think maybe that's what's in me, is that stubbornness in that if something goes wrong, I'm like, right, I'm going to pick myself up, I'm going to learn what I did, and I'm going to change it, or I'm going to do what I can to move forward.
That your Instagram photo, your profile photo is from a video. I can't remember which race it was, but it's the exact like photo of just pure shock. It looks like when you come up from the water and you see that you've won. I'm curious, how do you describe,
Yeah.
that feeling? And for the times throughout your career, swimming or not swimming, where perhaps you failed, do you feel kind of the opposite of that pure, like what's the word, adrenaline and like excitement, and then the failure that can also be the other side of that for anyone who's going towards any big goal.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really easy to measure success in sport, which is probably why it appeals to a lot of people to do it, because you get a nice shiny medal and it's like, there, that's the result of my hard work. I think it's a bit different when you're in a space where, as an entrepreneur, perhaps, yes, your business might be successful, but there's no guarantee. And how do you measure that? I think that's the thing, is where it's easy to measure, then you can look at it and go, oh yeah, that's my motivator. This is what I'm aiming for. I think if it's a more abstract goal, that's when it becomes harder to keep that motivation. So I'm not saying that it's easy being an athlete, but I think because you know that you're working over a cycle, like every 4 years you have a Paralympic or Olympic Games. So you're focused on that 4-year cycle. So you can break it down into year by year, month by month, season by season. And so it makes it easier to just keep going. Whereas I think if you're focused on a goal that has no end in sight, I think that's a lot harder to motivate for. So I would say those are the differences.
And for anyone who's also listening and can't figure out how to bounce back from that rejection, that failure, any advice for them? I talk so often about rejection on all of my platforms, and to hear how you've gone through it is probably very helpful.
Well, I mean, so the photo that you said about me being shocked and surprised when I won, I mean, that moment is indescribable, because that's like the end result of 8 years of hard work. But 4 years before that, when I was in London, the very same race in the 50 meters butterfly, I came fourth. So in my view, at the time, I had failed. Now, in a lot of other people's views, coming fourth in the world is pretty impressive. But in my mind, that wasn't good enough. So I think it's all subjective. I think the best thing when you're on a journey and you feel like you're failing, I always think it's better to be like, would you talk to yourself like you talk to a friend in this situation? How would you coach your friend in this situation and be kinder to yourself? And I wasn't very good at that as an athlete. I was probably the most self-critical person. But I suppose you've got to take it on the chin as well. You can't just be like, oh, self-care and kindness, because that's not going to necessarily give you ways forward. It's more, be kind to yourself, but equally look at what you can learn from it and think, right, how am I going to keep this going? I mean, when I came fourth in London, I remember all my family were like, oh, you should retire. Just don't bother. Don't carry on another 4 years. Leave it.
Why?
You've done it. Because I had won medals, and I'd won 3 bronze medals, and they were like, you worked so hard, it's amazing. And I was like, no, I have unfinished business. And again, it was like intuition. A lot of it is instinct. I think people don't listen to their instincts enough and their intuition. It's like there's something in you that tells you to keep going. And if you were to be like, well, why after failure, then I think for me it was wondering if there were things that I could do that were better, that might result in something better. Now, if I had done all of that and it had been the same result, then I probably would have walked away knowing, okay, I did all that I could. But I think you have to be honest with yourself and say, did I do everything I could have done? And if you didn't, which I didn't in London, I knew I hadn't. So it's like, right, okay, I have to be realistic.
Everyone always says, self-care and like taking time off. And I fully agree with that with burnout. I mean, I've experienced, and I don't know if you've experienced any throughout your career, but that helps. Like going to get a massage, going to get your nails done, going on a walk, of course. But you're right. I do think that a lot of people just kind of lean into that, but they also don't kind of look at the bigger picture of like what has made you get to this point, because you're so focused on, and that's such a buzzword, right? Like self-care and relaxing and like give yourself a day off. And that's true. But okay, now what? From there, have you ever experienced burnout in your career?
Yeah, I mean, the flip side of the self-care talk is that as an athlete, we didn't have any of that. And I'm teaching myself that, because for many athletes, we are slightly odd in that we're willing to push our bodies to such extremes that it's not really healthy. Like mentally, it's not healthy. Physically, it's not healthy. So despite what you think, you see an elite athlete and you're like, oh, they're the fittest person in the world. Well, no, they're actually borderline dangerously unhealthy in many ways. And I think by unhealthy, I mean that the habits you develop, the obsessive behavioral patterns, those are things that I've tried to kind of unravel and unpick since retiring from sport, because they are unhelpful for me now. So, obsessing over, my nutrition, yes, that's really important, but it's not for performance needs. Being really hard on myself when I don't win or do something that I'm expecting, not so helpful. So it's almost like relearning. But obviously, as an athlete, these things were very useful, but they're not really that useful in the bigger world, where you can't just punish yourself all the time just because you're not achieving like absolute perfection constantly.
Is that perfectionism across the board with all athletes, or just people who are swimmers?
I would say it's probably a common trait for a lot of athletes generally. That's to say we shouldn't assume that athletes are just one homogenous group of people. Everyone is human. They have their own individual characters. So I would say there were plenty, but I'd say the one thing that everybody had in common was a drive to be the best, and a drive to be. It's perfectionism. It's a drive to be perfect, so that when you're performing in whatever sport you're in, you're absolutely nailing it on the day. But the flip side of that is, if you don't get it right or you make a mistake, it can be quite devastating. So you're on like a roller coaster of highs and lows, which I think is not very sustainable for the long term.
Grew up in a very small town in Eastern Connecticut called Mansfield, and it was on the campus of UConn, and very close to like where the Patriots were in Boston, like where they train and whatnot. And I just always remember reading these articles about like how Tom Brady and like what his training is, and not eating this. And I'm curious because I appreciate that you bring that up, because I think perfectionism and also sometimes like eating habits and that kind of neuroses surrounding what to eat and how to do that. And I've always read stories about him in particular, and the specificness of like what he's allowed to eat, what he can't eat. And it always to me borderline some form of an eating disorder. So would you say that like that disordered eating, or what you've experienced with it, was something just trying to be perfect, or did it go also a bit more into like a few body image issues or more disordered like eating style?
I think it can depend on the person. And the other thing I would comment on, because we were talking about sports, and you've mentioned like a team sport. I mean, I've not really done a team sport. I was in a team, but essentially I did individual races. When I did relays and I was with 3 other people, the pressure that you feel to be perfect for your teammates is another layer. So I kind of admire people that do team sports, because I think that's a whole other level of pressure. Because if you are the one that lets the team down, you feel really bad, which it's like double layers of levels of stress. So yeah, I guess I think it depends on the person as to whether it develops into something toxic and not healthy. I was probably lucky in that I was aware of it. I had some conversations that were pretty unpleasant with coaches, where they'd be like talking about my weight. And I was the kind of person that would just be like, okay, never mind, just I was strong in myself, and I had a sense of what I thought was right for me. But I think the problem with sport is that they don't individualize it. So it's like, oh, well, this works and this is a fad, so let's get everybody to try this new thing. Like, let's make everybody vegan. Let's, because that's going to mean you perform better. And then the next month it'll be like, oh, let's do this, because they're scientists, so they're kind of on the latest craze and trend and data. But the bottom line is it's all balance, and I think it's all very personal. So I don't think you should ever force someone to go down a route of something that they think is not right for their body. It has to be right for you. Having said that, though, when you're guided by a team of staff, you listen to them because they're the experts. So you think, oh, okay, they're right, I must do what they say. I'm probably a bad example of that, because I question a lot, and I'm always like, well, why do I need to do that? And they hated me for it, because it'd be like, oh, just do it. And I'm like, well, no, but I want to ask why. You tell me why I'm doing this. And very often they can't really give you a decent answer. And then it's like, well, okay, I'll do it if I think it's necessary.
What age were you exactly when you started swimming?
So I was professionally like in my early 20s.
it just makes me so concerned, with athletes and now with access to social media of how detrimental and intense like the rules and regulations about body image I think can be, and how much you're supposed to train and what you're supposed to eat. For anyone listening who struggles with their own form of body image problems or is wanting to participate in some form of a college sport and is noticing that they're struggling with perhaps too much pressure from coaches or parents and it's really affecting their health, but they also want to become successful in that sport, what would you say to them?
Well, I think it's hard because depending on the sport, some sports you need to be a certain weight to be able to participate because you're put in categories. I feel so sorry for those athletes because I think that must be extremely challenging to have to navigate. I think also if you're in a sport where you're very visible and you're wearing like a leotard or hardly any, I mean, swimming is like that. I mean, we were essentially on show wearing practically nothing. So, obviously a swimsuit, but it still feels like you're in a position of vulnerability because you're on show and like all of the coaches are fully dressed. So you're there in a position already of having less power. And I feel that that can sometimes be not a nice place to be in, put it that way. But I would say in terms of body image, I do always say that, everybody is different. I've been in so many locker rooms where I've seen all shapes and sizes, all variations, and all are great, all have their own health, have their own unhealthy issues. You have to work within the realms of what's right for you. And I do think that, yes, you can listen to the advice. Yes, you can listen to the latest trends, but I think you have to go with what feels right for you. It's the intuition thing again.
Similar to modeling industry, probably with the body image and the weight and the specifications. But you're right. I mean, you don't even think about it, right? Like you're on TV and that swimsuit and everyone's clothes and everyone's watching you. And it's like this odd vulnerability that's probably not nearly spoken about as much, especially with female athletes in comparison to male athletes who are playing football or soccer prior to age 20. So if age 20, around your 20s is when you started professionally swimming, were you ever working a traditional job before that, or were you just in
Yeah.
university?
No, I was. So I graduated from university and then I got a job in London. I moved to London and I started working like a 9 to 5 in an office job. And I, at the same time, was like, this was around 2005. And I was thinking, right, that's it. We just won the bid to host London in 2012. There's a chunk of time there that I can, give it a go. And I think that was what appealed to me. I think had it not been a home games, I may not have tried. I may not have thought, I might have just said, right, I'll go down that professional route. But because London was there and the opportunity to compete, once in a lifetime opportunity to compete for your country in your country, I was like, I have to keep going and I have to give it a go. So yeah, that's what really made me very motivated. And I would be, I look back now and I don't know how I did it, but I was working 9 to 5. I was not funded. So I was just trying to get, because we have like a funding system, but you have to be a certain level to get the funding. And I was working my way up. So I had to self-fund everything. So I was working and then I was commuting all over London to get to training venues. I'd go out at like 7 in the morning and I wouldn't get home till like, midnight. Then I'd get up the next day and I'd do it again. And I'd be doing this sort of day in, day out. And then I'd have like maybe one day off. And then I started going to the gym as well and doing like weight training. And so I was really working my butt off. And then I remember the nutritionist said to me, Susie, you're not really keeping a lot of weight on. And I'm like, well, I'm not surprised. I'm like running everywhere. And like, yeah, I mean, the benefit of it was that I was super fit. So, doing all of that with a prosthetic leg, meant that I was really, really super fit. And I think it gave me an added edge because my fitness levels were always brilliant. So it was the stuff that I was doing in the pool, but also out of the pool that made a big difference.
How was it that you were able to achieve more having a limitation that is like a leg in comparison to somebody who has all two arms, two legs?
In terms of swimming?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, a lot of people have asked that. I mean, so my missing limbs are on the same side, on my left side. So so people are like, how does she swim in a straight line? Because in theory I should go in a go in a circle, really. um so but I don't, you know, I don't really know the answer to that, because I think a lot of coaches were like, I don't know how she swims the way she swims. I think it's just a natural ability and a natural kind of connection with the water that I've always felt comfortable in the water. When I swim, I don't wear my limbs. I'm completely free. I'm just much more comfortable in the water than I am on land, where I'm having to wear like technology and assistive devices to help me. So I'm like, actually, being in the water is a pleasure for me. It's perfect. I'm totally myself. So I think maybe there's something in that. There's like a kind of a deeper connection with it as a sport. So I mean, there was no other sport that I would have done. It was my only sport, and it still is. You know, I still swim regularly because it's the thing that I feel so connected to. You know.
It's truly such a pleasure for me to interview founders, celebrities, whatever, across the board who are really living out, I think, what they were meant to do. And it seems like you, and that first time you got in the water, that was kind of your purpose. You say that most people, you need funding. So is that for any form of a sport? Like, I mean, and I probably sound so silly, but I don't know anything about being an athlete. So like, do you like a sponsor? Is it because you have to pay for the training? How do you even get to being in like somewhere where you're close to an Olympic versus just being in college and playing a sport?
Yeah, I mean, well, how it works in the UK system is that like there's some government funding that comes from the national lottery, that people play the lottery, and that funding then goes to an organisation called UK Sport, who then distribute that money to all the sports. And if you are good enough, you get sort of put on this program of different layers based on your potential to win medals. So if you're kind of in a good trajectory, you're like second position in the world, third position in the world ranked, each year you will be retained on funding. But it's an annual cycle of them assessing that, which means it's really, really intense, because if you don't hit your times, or if something happens, or you're injured, or you're sick, or whatever, you can get taken off funding, and it's up to them and the decision makers there. I think the system's not ideal, but it's the system that they have. And in terms of sponsorship, I think it's very, very hard, in all honesty, to secure sponsorship as a Paralympic athlete. There just isn't that recognition that is there on the Olympic side. But also, if you look at it, I mean, even on the Paralympic side, there's always one or two athletes that are like the media darlings or the favorites that everybody want to jump on and give money to, and everyone forgets about everybody else. And I was always an athlete that was on the radar, performing, doing well, but I was never quite capturing whatever it was that they were looking for to, you know, throw a load of money at. So I had to navigate it myself. But in a way, you know, I feel quite proud of that, because I think, well, you know, it was on my terms and I don't owe anyone anything.
So how did you get them then to almost, or I guess let me rephrase that. Would you say that to get where you've gotten in your career, it takes someone kind of taking a chance on you?
I guess it does. You know, I mean, God knows how the media works and who's favored and who gets put
Yeah.
forward. I'm not sure how it works. I don't think it's particularly fair or right, or, you know, or even the right people get promoted. And I don't even think you need to win to get to that point of, you know, in certain sports. There is that element of sports as well. Some sports are super popular and everybody watches them, and they have regular competition, like football, you know, soccer,
Mhm.
that, you know, everybody here watches it all the time. Loads of people go and watch it in stadiums. Whereas with swimming, I would say lower audience, fewer people might watch it. So if they identify one or two people that they want to kind of push to that next level sponsorship wise, it's going to be a small number. So that means a lot of people are not going to get that opportunity.
Oh, interesting. So do you know if it's similar at all in the US? Because I know most people in the US go like, if they want to, like football, right? You go to university and or high school, and that's kind of how you get scouted. Then you get like free kind of ride, I think, to school.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the system is a bit more geared towards supporting athletes in the US. I
Hmm.
think because you've got that collegiate system, I think that's really good. And I know a lot of UK athletes that go and join swim teams at colleges over in the States because it's a way in of getting, well, for starters, amazing like coaching and opportunities. But also, you know, you just don't get that in the UK. We just don't have that system. So I would say it's probably, I mean, I'm not sure about the differences between Olympic and Paralympic over in the US. I think there was something that there's equal pay, but I don't know about sponsorship or, you know, I'm assuming it's going to grow because you've got LA 2028 coming up. So that's a
Hmm.
real opportunity for the US to really kind of galvanize a lot of support for athletes. So hopefully it'll grow.
Interesting. Wow, so fascinating. So, what is the long-term goal for kind of your brand? I mean, you spent 20 plus years of your life as a professional athlete, and then you decided to leave. At what year?
I retired in 2017, so after the games in 2016.
Was that because you were like, I'm so done, like I can't do this anymore, or you wanted to focus on other things?
I got to the top, and I'm not the kind of person that feels the need to repeat it again and again. I was like, I've done it. I achieved that goal. Now I need to move on. That's the other thing about athletes. I think they feel a need to keep going because I think they just don't know what else to do. And there's not a lot of emphasis put on other career paths. But I had been working before I got into sports. So it was almost, for me, it felt like I want to develop my career. I also missed using my brain, doing really complex work. So I was like, right, that's it. I'm not saying that athletes don't do that, but you know, I felt like I needed to do like a job that would really get me thinking. And I was like, that's what I need to be doing. So I also, you know, I had my degree. I work in kind of international relations work. So I wanted to go back to that. I felt like that was something that I was also meant to do and enjoy. But I mean, I think maybe, yeah, it's just my way. I just kind of get to a goal and I reach it, and then I have to have a new one and move on because I just get bored, you know.
So you got bored a bit of swimming.
Not bored of, I think bored of the competing because I think
Hmm.
I'd learned everything that I could learn. um I couldn't do any more. I was like, well, what more am I going to do in another 4 years, you know? And it's very monotonous, like you're doing the training day in day out. You don't have a lot of time to socialize. You don't really have a life. And I was like, I want a life. I don't want to spend all of my life doing this because I think it's important that I do other things. Like, it's all balance. I do believe in balance. So I was like, I dedicated 15 years to this. That's enough, you know?
Yeah, I never even asked you when you were in your 20s and you were doing the training and working, what kind of company were you working at originally?
I was working for it was like an international relations organization for
Got
the
it.
UK government. So we like worked with different countries, and I speak some languages. So I was like using my language skills. So that was what I was working on before I even got into sports. So I do appreciate, though. I don't want to sort of say that carrying on as an athlete is a bad thing. And I think for some people, they love it so much and it's so much of who they are that they want to continue doing it. And I think that's fair enough, you know. But for me personally, being an athlete wasn't the only goal in my life. That's the thing.
Yeah, which is nice to hear somebody say because there is sometimes where I think as a founder, whatever you're aspiring to be, you'll probably reach a level of like, what is the top? And so you can decide to pursue
Mm.
other things. Like there's no bad thing that comes out of being like, okay, I've done this for X amount of time and now I'm ready to like pivot or do something else. So I reward you for that. You are truly just such an inspiration. I am so glad that I met you at that event and that I get to watch what your next chapter is like. For anyone who listened to this episode and wants to follow or connect with you on social media, where is the best place to do that?
Yeah, like LinkedIn, Instagram, you know, whatever works. I don't use Twitter as much now, but or X or whatever it's called. But yeah, Instagram works.
I hate that they changed it. I will put all the information about you in the show notes. I have one last question, Susie. What is next for you?
uh, I think giving back. You know, my big thing as an athlete was about me, because ultimately when you're an athlete, you're driven towards your goal. Yes, you have you can't do it on your own, you've got a team around you, but ultimately they and you are all geared towards your goals. And I like that the work I do now, so I work in human rights, is about helping other people. It's about using whatever knowledge I have and supporting other people. And I think that, to me, and that kind of a bit less of a kind of selfish mode and more of a giving mode. I'm not saying that it's a selfish thing being an athlete, because it's a big sacrifice, you made huge sacrifices, but you are driven towards your own goals. So it's helping people with their goals. Maybe that's important to me. So yeah, giving back.
Very nice. And you have so much wisdom to give people for their goals. So thank you for everything, and for everything you've shared in this episode. For everyone who enjoyed listening, you can follow The New Unfiltered on social media at The New Unfiltered, as well as my personal Instagram, which is Alexa_Curtis. And just a quick reminder again to head to the show notes if you want to purchase a Be Fearless Summit ticket or subscribe to Stay Fearless or Die Trying. And I'll see you next week for a new episode of The New Unfiltered.